phone says it's 10 o'clock. I guess it's time to begin our service. Welcome everyone. Glad to have you here with us. We pray that this will be a lovely day for you. Good service. We enjoyed bringing the message in the 8 o'clock, and we're going to try again here in a moment to bring one here. Let's at this time go to the Lord's Prayer. Bud, would you lead us please? Brother Lawson, lead us in prayer.
Father, we're grateful that we had this opportunity to come into your house. Father, we're mindful of all those who come before us, who have sacrifices that we have this gift. You're thankful, Father, that we can come into your day. We come with joyful hearts, Father, because we know you love us. You provide salvation for us, and we do pray that as we gather together today and worship you, Father, that we bless you together. We do want to pray for those, Father, who have illnesses. We ask that you know them, Father, your loving kindness, your grace, and your healing mercy, Father. We accept the restoration and relief. Let Brother Ron this morning be open to work, Father, that he has. We thank you for loving us, Father. We thank you for loving us, Father. This fellowship together today, Father, we pray that we be honored today as we worship together. In Jesus' name.
Amen.
Good morning. Stand with us as we sing.
Thank you.
I'm accepted. You were condemned. I'm alive and well. Your spirit is within me, because you died and rose again. I'm forgiven because you were forsaken.
quiz before they put some verses up on the screen. Anybody here this morning that could quote Hebrews chapter 11, verse 1? Come on, snap it out there. Hebrews chapter 11, verse 1. Everybody? Huh? Hebrews chapter 11, verse 1. Okay, put it on the board. That Hebrews chapter 11, verse 1. Yeah, I'm like you. Sometimes you draw a blank and you can't do that. But we're going to look at these two verses. That's not where we're going to take our text from, however. Our text is going to be out of John chapter 6, and it's going to be the first 14 verses or 15 verses, somewhere along there. Before you're finding that, let me just say it's good to be in the Lord's house. It's good to get to try to fill in for Brother Steve. He's away on vacation. And I'm going to make this disclaimer right now, and I told the other service. I had cataract surgery here 4 weeks ago or something like that on my right eye, because it improves the vision. But you don't get new glasses right off the bat. And so when you put your glasses on, it's got the old prescription in it, and you can't see. So I'm up here, one of these numbers up here this morning. I'm trying to keep up with my outline, and it gets very difficult. If I take my glasses off, I can see out of my right eye, but then I can't see out of my left eye. So what they say is between a rock and a hard place. But I think we have come up with a plan A. If it don't work, we'll go to plan B. Tomorrow we're going to experiment with some stuff. But I want to just talk about these two verses that I have up here this morning that we have on there. Hebrews chapter 11, of course, is the hall of faith. It talks about a bunch of people that had faith. First of all, I think maybe one of the greatest chapters in the Bible. Brother Steve was here. He would say it was one of his favorites. He always, any scripture he comes up with is his favorite. It's his favorite song. So one time somebody had made a quilt. I didn't share this with other service. It's called somebody made a quilt and put Bible verses on it. That's somebody's favorite Bible verses. And Brother Steve said, I wish they'd make me one of those. They can't put the whole Bible on the quilt. That's what they'd have to do if they made him one. But anyhow, that's just a little bit of humor there. Men and women and all that have believed in God down through the centuries. There's always been those, faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. And what does faith mean? What is it? What is the meaning of faith? This is the only time in the Bible where we have a verse that defines faith. Tells us what faith is. Faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. That's faith. That's what it is. And and time again, the Bible discusses faith and the great importance of faith, doesn't it? It's very important that we have faith. Look at that other verse there in Hebrews chapter 11, verse 6. But without faith, what is it? It's impossible to please Him, for he who comes to God must believe that He is, and that He is a rewarder of those who diligently seek Him. So if you don't have faith, we're not going to please God, or we're not going to be pleasing to Him. As how many of you believe you've already exercised faith this morning? Yeah, first service know that, don't they? Your first exercise of faith, it may not fall in the category of faith, but I think it does. Your first exercise of faith was you trusted your car to get you from point A to point B. Faith in it, and it's going to get me there. You got in, you started up, you backed out of the driveway, pulled out the driveway, and drove off. Faith or confidence in your car, maybe that's the word we need to use on that. And then all of you are exercising faith right now. And what I mean by that, you have faith believing that pew is going to hold you up. Simple thing is faith, isn't it? You haven't ever thought, that's all folks, we're going to go home now. Have you ever thought about that? Just exercising faith, and we have to have faith. Men and women that have had faith in the Bible, men and women that have not had faith, and God shows in clear terms to me. He knows what is happening, but nowhere does the Bible really define faith other than right here. Now, I have a bunch of people through the Bible now. They will try me on that statement, but that's okay. Go ahead. If I'm wrong, I've got somebody else's word for it anyhow. Okay, I do that sometimes. But You know, the biblical definition of faith is just, and reading different commentaries and different translations of the Bible, you get different ways they word it. I'm going to read a couple to you this morning here, and then we'll move on about what faith is, and then we're going to talk about the not having faith, and then we're going to look at three kinds of faith when we get in John chapter 6. And you say, Brother Ron, I thought there's only one kind of faith. Well, that may be true, but it's practiced in different ways, and if I want to do that, we're going to look at, there's going to be a couple of big words I'm going to use, and I couldn't, for the life of me this morning, in the first service, I couldn't remember Webster's dictionary. I told him, these are big words, and I thought what's funny. I guess it was a Funkin' Wagon dictionary or encyclopedia or something like that. And I used that phrase, and then I could not remember Webster's dictionary. So if I'd had to come up with the answer to that, I would still be standing up here. Finally, sitting back there after service, drinking a cup of coffee, just out of the blue, I said, Webster's dictionary. Sister Glenda knew what I was talking about. He said, Brother, somebody was thinking of it, and they wouldn't holler it out. But anyhow, just think about that. You know, our verse 1, faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. Now, the New American Standard puts it this way. Now, faith is the assurance of things hoped for, the conviction of things not seen. And then Williams' translation, now faith is the assurance of things we hope for, the proof of the reality of the things we cannot see. Faith is the substance of things hoped for. Faith is being sure of things we hope for, being convinced of the things we cannot see. Now, faith is the assurance, the confidence, the title deed of the things we hope for, being the proof of things we do not see, and the conviction of their reality. Faith perceives a real fact, what is not revealed in sense. Faith is the title deed of things hoped for, the conviction of things that are not being seen. Now that title deed, when you think about that, if you have a title deed to something, you own that, don't you? That is your possession. That's what faith is. Faith is our possession. We possess that. You know, faith and hope go together. The commentary of Matthew Henry, if any of you have done any Bible study, you've read some of his comments and stuff, but he says, faith and hope go together, and the same things that are the object of our hope and the object of our faith. If faith is a firm persuasion and expectation that God will perform all that He has promised to us in Christ, and this presumption is so strong that it gives the soul possession of those things. So our conviction is so big. Believe in the exercise of faith and fill with joy unspeakable and full of glory. Christ dwells in the soul by faith, and the soul is filled with the fullness of God. So what is faith? Faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. And we're going to talk about exercising faith a little bit. But let's think just a little bit about that second verse up there. Let's just do a little quick overview of it, and then we'll get to our text and get things kind of going here. I told him we were joking about how long we should take on a message. I think he was joking, maybe they weren't. I don't know how long I was going to preach. I took it as a joke, okay? It didn't offend me, but I think I found out at one time I learned that the average teaching span is about 17 minutes. So if I go over 17 minutes, I'm probably not going to get your attention very long. And I'll share this with you, and I'm sure that with others. But I tell Brother Steve, and he looks over there, and I'm sitting there with my head down and my eyes closed. I am not asleep. I am praying for you. That's what I tell him. Now, I'm not sure he believes that, and I'm not sure it's true. But if I see you with your head down this morning and your eyes closed, by faith, I'm going to believe that you're praying. All right? So we do that. But nevertheless, verse 6 says, it's impossible to please God without faith. But without faith, it is possible to please Him. We have to have faith, don't we? You know, by faith, it means living. It means active faith, a faith that knows and follows God commands and fellowship with God. Now, it doesn't matter what we know, does it? It doesn't matter what a person knows. Without faith, you cannot please God. You can have all the sheepskins that the colleges give out, but if you don't have faith, you're not going to please God. It's utterly impossible, without reading that verse, but without faith, it is impossible to please Him, for he who comes to God must believe. You have to believe that He is. Without faith, the person will never live with God, not in this world or not in the next world. We have faith. We are saved by faith through grace. There's that faith that we believe that God exists. And without faith, a person just has to plow through life alone and handle the trials and tribulations by himself. And we don't have to do that. Just think about that a little bit as we think about this, talking about faith, and we begin to look at the different types of faith. Now, in John chapter 6, 1 through 15, if you found that, that's fine. If you haven't, you will be all right. This is where Jesus feeds the multitude, feeds the 5,000. I want to give you a couple of other things, and you can challenge these if you want to. I didn't come up with them. I'm reading them from somebody else that they're saying that this miracle of the feeding of the 5,000, besides Jesus' resurrection, that is recorded in all four Gospels. This is the only miracle that Jesus, out of all the miracles that Jesus performed, this is the only one that is recorded in all four Gospels, like the resurrection is. Now, I want to say this. I haven't checked. I'm not going to spend my time reading through all the miracles and that. I'm going to take this person's word for it for right now. It doesn't mean anything, really. But I'm going to say this. If it is in all four Gospels, and that's the only miracle that they've recorded in all four Gospels, then it must be important. Must really want us to look at this. Must really want us to see what Jesus is trying to teach His disciples here in these verses. And He's teaching them about faith. He's teaching them about having faith and the type of faith that they have. And then I go on to find that they say that there was potentially more than 20,000 people there at that time. Now, I said this in the first service, and I'm going to say it again in this service. I don't know who done the head count. Now, I don't know how they done the head count. But I do know they may have been descendants, our ancestors of the ones that are doing the COVID-19 test today. Are reporting the numbers there. Could be. I don't know that they are. If they are, I hope I'm not offending anybody. That's good. But anyhow, it's just the number of those was about 5,000. We know it's 5,000 men, and so they're giving credit for women and children, and I don't know what else they're counting. But that's a good thing to think about. But, and take it for what it's worth. It costs you any extra. Let me ask you this: do any of you like recipes? Copy down recipes for stuff, and bake stuff. It's just Carolyn back there does. She made some terrific lunch Thursday, didn't she? I like this request. I love y'all lessons. The reason I asked you this about a recipe, I've got a recipe I'm going to give to you. You can write it down if you want to. It's a recipe for stone soup. Anybody ever heard of that? Ever heard of stone soup? Somebody in the first service has heard of that. Patterson shaking her head. She said, well, what the old tale, and it has many variations about it, is the tale that tells of a starving man who came to a village. But no one there could even spare a crumb of food for him. He couldn't spare any food at all. Wasn't going to give him anything. So he took a couple of stones and put it in a water pot over a fire and began to boil that 2 stones of water. Well, it intrigued the villagers. You know how it is. When you see something, you're going, I'm going to take a closer look at what's this guy doing. I'm going to take a closer look at that. Watch him. It begins to stir up the soup, and eventually someone brings a couple of potatoes and throws in the pot. That's good. And then maybe a few carrots. Somebody brings a few carrots and puts in there, and then maybe somebody comes along and adds an onion. Another brings a handful of barley and throws in the pot, and then a farmer donates some milk. So eventually what they come up with is stone soup that becomes a tasty chowder. Now the moral to that old wives' tale there is, bring what you have to God. That's it makes a difference what you have, bring it to God, and that's where it's going to work at. And we're going to find here that Jesus, or God, in our text this morning, is He's concerned about all needs, no matter how small the need or how stormy the problem is. Jesus is the provision. He is the bread of life, the power to meet man's every need that we have. He can meet that need. He can provide a single meal, which He's going to do here. He's going to take 5 little loaves of bread and 2 fish, and He's going to feed 5,000 people. And we think that's small. No, that's not really small, but it's a small matter. Where it's small at is the matter of He's worried about this multitude going without a meal. That's what He's concerned about here. These people that follow Him. We'll talk a little bit about that, but and He can calm the most raging storm that is possible. Now it just doesn't get too little for Him, and it doesn't get too big for Him. And He is the bread of life, isn't He? He is the provision for all humanity and all material needs, our spiritual needs, our material needs, and things like that. And what we'll find here in Matthew, okay, I better get over the book of John, okay? I better get over the 6th chapter, beginning with verse 1. All right. What we find here is the setting where Jesus is at. First 6 verses tell us where He's at. He is, and after these things, in verse 1, Jesus went over to the Sea of Galilee, which is the Sea of Tiberias, and a great multitude followed Him. And I'm not going to give us a geographic lesson, because I probably wouldn't understand it anyhow, but the place where Jesus had left and went to, and this place where He went to be alone, and He's up on a mountain, and He's sitting there with His disciples, and I think He's he's meditating or whatever. He's trying to get away from the crowd and all that has been on him. But they say that for this crowd to get to where Jesus is at now, it was about a 9-mile track, about a 9-mile walk around the sea there to get to Him. So they put out some quite a bit, and He said, now the Passover feast of the Jews were near. And then when Jesus lifted up His eyes, seeing a great multitude coming toward Him, He said to Philip, where shall we buy bread that these may eat? Okay, so like I say, He's concerned about the little things. And here's this great crowd of, if it's 20,000 people, or whatever it is, there's that great crowd of people, and so He's concerned about them. He wants to help them. He's sitting there with His disciples. He just crossed over the sea, like I said, and the crowd has followed Him. What about this following Him? There's 2 words that they say can be used here that means that people have been following Jesus for a long time, and they kept following on Him, beholding His ministry. They were looking at the miracles and things that Jesus done. Jesus was tired. He was human. The humanity of Jesus kicks in. He's tired, and He wants to get away from the pressures of facing the crowd day after day. That crowd was always after Him. The crowd was always there. And so, he was there, and when He sees this thousands streaming towards Him, He opens His eyes, and He wasn't sleeping. And He had His head down and His eyes closed, but He wasn't sleeping. He was praying. I think He was praying to the Father, and He was going to pray to the Father again. And, He sees the needs of mankind. He sees the needs of mankind, even like I say, even the smallest thing. He's worried right here about these people missing a meal. Just one meal. It's all we're going to worry about right here. And so He asked Philip, where should we buy bread for these people? Well, he knew what his answer was going to be before he asked it, but he's asking this to kind of get a response from Him. And the first faith we're going to look at, first kind of faith we're going to look at is pessimism. That's a big word for me. That's where I needed the dictionary this morning, but we have usual. Those of you that are phone savvy. I'm getting there where I can look up a word or I can find something, but usually it don't work really good. But it says this here is a pessimist. It's a noun, a tendency to see the worst aspect of things or believe that the worst will happen, a lack of hope or confidence in the future. That's what a pessimist is. So we know what a pessimist is. Okay, hard for me to say. We know what the definition of that is. And so let's look at Andrew here just a little bit. He said this in verse 6, but this he said to him, for he knew, to test him, for he knew what he would do. He already knew what he was going to do. He knew that he was going to do that. And Philip answered him, 200 denarius worth of bread is not sufficient for them, that every one of them may have a little. Okay, there's his response to Jesus' question. What are we going to do? How are we going to provide a meal for these people? And what a pessimist does, a pessimistic faith sees money and human resources, and that's about all they see. They just see the money and how much it's going to cost, and how little we're going to be able to buy with this, how little we're going to be able to do. They just see the available resources. They fail to see, they stress the hopelessness of it. Brother Steve says, "Oh, woe is me." That type of thing. Stress the importance of the situation, or the impossibility of the situation. My bifocals got a little twisted there on that word. But stress the impossibility of the situation, despair of such meager resources. We got just 200 denarios, and I don't know how much that would be in today's money. I know it wouldn't buy enough bread to feed 20,000 people, and that's what Philip is saying there. We don't have enough money to buy the provisions that are needed. That's being pessimistic about it. It's swamped by the hopelessness of the answer. In verse 7, Philip answered him, and the 200 it's not sufficient. It's just not enough. I just don't see it. A pessimist's face forgets that God's glorious power in the past. We've seen it work before, haven't we? They have seen Jesus work miracles before, perform miracles. One of them was he was asleep in the ship, and the storm came along, and they woke him up, and he calmed the sea. So if he can calm the sea, he can feed the 20,000, can't he? There's no doubt about that, but still, in reality, and I think we do that sometimes today ourselves, in reality, we want to look at the situation and the meager things that we have rather than what God can do with it. When I say bring what you have to God, that stone soup, you bring what you have and give it to God in faith, believing He'll do something with it. I do this. I've said this time before, but if you have faith, you can sail to that mountain, be thou removed, and then you're cast into the sea. And one lady go to bed in the night. She had a big oak tree out there side of her house, and she said, "The Lord, you said if I had faith the size of a mustard seed, and I asked that tree to be gone, it'd be gone." And so she prays that before she goes to bed, and she gets up the next morning and she looks out the window and says, "Just as I figured, the tree's still up." That is not faith, is it? that is pessimistic faith, it is. And just God's favor, God's power, it is in its mind, it's only earthly things. Pessimistic, only think of earthly things, not spiritual things. And it's critical that we need to think on the spiritual things. We need to do that. So, if we're going to be pessimistic, I'll have to admit, sometimes I've been that way. I've been pessimistic at times about things once I found out what it meant. But if you don't know what it means, you may not be. But a person that has a faith like this feels that the problem is too big for God. That is the farthest thing from the truth. Either it's too little for God to be interested in that thing, or it's not worthy of His time. He don't have time for that. The fear that God's power will fail and the person's faith will be weakened. So they just do that. Therefore, the person is safe to pray weakly. And what do we do when we pray weak? We pray, "Lord, thy will be done." Sin will fall. Well, that's kind of being a little bit pessimistic, isn't it? Kind of think, well, if you can do that, you do it. But if not, that's okay. You can't do it, it's okay. But anyhow, they fail to see that God cares and loves, interest and concern over every little thing that happens to a person. Even the sparrows, he feeds them, doesn't he? Just that, he knows the hairs on our head. For some, it's more than others. And, you knew that was coming. But anyhow, pessimistic faith will look to others for help instead of looking to God and depending on Him alone. Philip here, he would probably run around and ask somebody else, get us more money, let's pick up another collection. We ain't got near enough here. We ain't got enough. But anyhow, but fails to see that God is glorified when He provides and meets the need. God is glorified when He meets the need. He meets it. Now, let's look at pessimistic. Let's look at verse 8 and 9, and we will see optimistic. Optimist faith. It's just the opposite of pessimistic, really. But I get my Google search to work here, and I'll bring that up, and I'll read you what it says about that, about optimism. Hopefulness and confident about the future of the successful outcome of something. So, now, this next person we're going to look at here is one of the disciples, Andrew, verse 9, and 8. Andrew, Simon Peter's brother, said unto him, there is a lad here who has 5 barley loaves and 2 small fish. He's worked the crowd. He's been out there. Maybe they walked up that little boy and poked him on the shoulder or something, got a conversation going with him, found out he had his lunch with him. I guess it was a sack lunch, probably a basket lunch. I don't know what, maybe a sheepskin. I don't know what they carried their lunch in. Then I'm just speculating. But anyhow, they done that, and he said the lad here has his 5 barley loaves and 2 small fish. But what are they among so many? Okay, he's got faith. We've got some provisions here, haven't we? It questions faith. It loves God and its commandments to God. And, his concern was that he looked among the crowd, he found and gathered all the resources he could. He got all that he could find, 5 loaves, and and really the question here is the optimist faith. The question lays what it can find before the Lord, no matter how little the resource. We got to remember that, or how poor the quality, it is laid before the Lord. It is laid before Him. And, the barley bread was there, was poor bread. Wasn't bread. It was just poor. The 2 small fish were small. He had searched, Andrew had searched, he had found nothing but those 5 small loaves of bread and those 2 fish. And he offered what he found. The boy was, and his food to the Lord. He offers that to the Lord. And the question is, but what are they among so many? He said, okay, here's 5 loaves of bread, and here's 2 fish. But what is that among so many? He's beginning to question now. He's beginning to question of the faith a little bit. He's complaining about the problem a little bit. He's being anxious about the meager resources. We only got 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish. He's grumbling over the small provisions and poor quality. Like I said, the quality there wasn't much. Those 5 loaves of bread and those 2 fish. I believe Jesus could help them in his hand. I mean, if that little boy was carrying him anything, it wasn't very big, but he was carrying him on. But a questioning faith looks at the need and then looks at the resources. Just the meager resources. Just what is there, and but how little and how poor quality it is. Sometimes we think about that in our Christian life, don't we? We think about, how poor I am at presenting the gospel, or how poor I am about witnessing to somebody. I just don't have that get up and go, that zeal that I need. But we can exercise that faith, and the resources and the question, and they question God. Can God really do this? Can He take this small amount? Can He feed these 5,000 or these 20,000? Can that be done? And the need may be, whatever it is, the need for food, it may be for health, money, disease, or whatever it is. Whatever the need, the fundamental need in one of us to learn to trust Christ, trust God, and not question and doubt his love and care and wisdom. We sometimes do that, do we not? We sometimes question God's ability, whether he loves us, whether he loves others, whether he cares for others, whether he has wisdom and power. But those two kinds of faith right there they're there. I mean, it's it. It's pessimistic. You can be optimistic about it. In verses 10 through 13, we're going to find a positive faith, and that's Jesus Christ is the one who's doing that. And like I said, this is all brought out here to teach the disciples a lesson about faith, believing in God, and that's what our message is about this morning, is about the faith that we exercise. Now, faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen, but, you got down to that verse 6, but without faith. We don't have faith, we're not going to please God, so we've got to have faith, and, positive, unwavering faith. That is verse 10 through 13. Then Jesus said, make the people sit down. Set them down out there. Now there was much grass in the place, so that the men sat down, the number about 5,000. And Jesus took the loaves, and when he had given thanks, he distributed them to the disciples, and the disciples would go setting down, and likewise of the fish, and as much as they wanted. And so when they were filled, he said to the disciples, gather up the fragments that remain, so that nothing is lost. Therefore they gathered them up and filled 12 baskets with the fragments of the 5 barley loaves which were left over, and by those who had eaten. Okay, there we go. We've got it. Jesus took what he had, and he gave thanks to God for what he had. It may have only been a meager supply of bread. In fact, like I said, he could hold it in his hand, but he didn't stand there looking at the messenger. He didn't stand there questioning or begin griping or being despaired about it or hopeless or wondering how he was going to do and how he was going to meet the needs. He looked up and he gave thanks to God. He looked up, he gave thanks to God, and that small supply and that poor quality was, what mattered was that he had something and there was a problem. And that problem was turned into the feeding of the 5,000, or to take that number I gave you earlier, 20,000 people. However many people it was, that started out was not even enough to feed that young lad. I would say, venture to say, those 5 barley loaves and those 2 fishes wasn't even enough to do that. But when Jesus, by faith, asked God to take care of it, it was enough to do everything. It was all he needed. Jesus gave what he had. He could do was distribute what he had, was in his hands, and trust God that he did. He simply gave what he had to God. And that's what we need to do. All a man can do is give what he has. That's all a person can do. Give what you have, what you hold in your hands, what you possess. But we can do better than that. We can, if a man gives to God, let God do the rest. That's where we fail a lot of times, isn't it? That's where we fail a lot of times. Kind of like that woman that prayed for her tree to be removed out of her yard. A lot of times we pray for God to do something, and then we say, well, I thought it didn't happen anyway. And like Brother Steve was pointing out a couple of times, I want y'all to tell him that I mention him in the sermons, because he thinks nobody pays attention to him, but I do. When I'm not praying for him, I'm paying attention, okay? But I've heard him say, in the messages about, I forgot what it's is this ever silly? Where was I going with this? Brother Steve, well, it'll come back to me after all. I'll do that. Yeah, that's what I tell you. That's mad cow disease that he talks about. But you be sure to tell him that I pay attention to him, because he tells you things, he says things in messages, and I remember them, and I had one on my mind there, but I forgot it. But it'll come back to me in a minute. And Jesus, just used other things to help him in meeting the needs. He gave it to the disciples. He gave it to the disciples, and they distributed out, and they fed the 12,000. What a man gives is what he has. He must put his power and provision in God. And so, Jesus exercised the kind of faith that we need to exercise. We say, well, he's God. Well, yes, he was. He's God's Son. He's human. He's in human flesh. He's teaching his disciples what they need to know in order to get by in this whole world, in order to please God. But without faith, it is impossible to please Him. If we want to please God, we have to have faith. And we need the right kind of faith. We need that faith that is confident that God will do what He says He'll do, that God will take what we give Him and He will use it. All we got to do is be willing to give it. This little boy could have said, no, this is my lunch, and I'm not sharing with anybody else. He was before the age of everybody got a trophy, wasn't he? He was before that happened, so he was willing to share and take it and do what you can do with it. Ain't going to feed very many people, but use it for what you can use. Give God the glory out of it. So we need to do that. We need to do that. And He's going to meet the needs. The leftovers, 12 baskets full was left over. Now, I don't know if there's any significance about that, but there was 12 disciples with Him. And 12 servants who had been obedient to helping Christ. And each servant was getting a supply that would last him for days. Those baskets full was going to last them for days. And every ounce of the provision that was here was to be used at some future day. Wasn't going to be any of it wasted. Wasn't going to be anything wasted that was there. And so, while a man is given what he has, he must trust God's power. Again, I just emphasize that enough. If you look at verse 14 and 15. Then these men, when they had seen the sign that Jesus did, said, "This is truly the prophet who is to come into the world." Okay, this is a materialistic profession of Jesus. This is not saving faith that they have here. This is faith believing that He is the Messiah, the promise that the prophet said was going to come into the world. That's what they're saying. In verse 15, therefore, when Jesus perceived that they were about to come and take Him by force to make Him king, that's what they're wanting to do. They're wanting to set up an earthly kingdom with Jesus, and He departed again to the mountains by Himself alone. All right. So He had just fed and He healed them. They'd seen all these miracles that Jesus had done. He'd done what every man wanted. He met their needs for health and food. That's what they wanted to do. That's basic needs, isn't it? It's food, health, shelter, clothing, and things like that. They wanted to set Him up as an earthly king. They wanted to be freed from all this bondage that they were in under the Romans. He had fed them. He had done what everyone needed, the health and food. They had food for the hungry, healing for their sicknesses, deliverance from their trials, comfort in their sorrows, plenty for their wants, peace from their disturbance, victory over their enemies. God, Jesus was providing all those things. He was doing all of those to help them, but they were just interested in today. They were just interested in the moment. They weren't concerned about the future. Of course, Jesus and God can help a person do anything. No matter the problem, if we trust God, He can do it. But with the crowd was a desire for the earthly and worldly satisfaction. That's what they were looking for. They were looking for worldly things, not spiritual things. It thought in terms of spiritual and material and not spiritual. We have to think spiritual today. Yeah, sure, we need some things. We have a few things that we have need of. We need food, we need clothing, we need shelter, we need water, we need those things, but, the physical and material things are only temporary. All this food, this 12 baskets that they took, they're eventually going to be gone. They're not going to last forever in that situation. They're not going to last forever, so they pass away. But the Lord's concern is permanent, it is spiritual. It's spiritual strength and spiritual blessings and, that last forever. They don't fade away. This is the reason that most men forsake Christ, because they demand that we deny ourselves. Deny ourselves. Jesus answered them, said unto you, verily, verily, I say unto you, you seek me not because you saw the miracles, but because you did eat the loaves and were filled. Labor not for the meat which perisheth, but for the meat which endureth unto everlasting life, which the Son of Man shall give unto you. For him hath God the Father seen. Faith, yeah. Have faith in our car to get us here. Have faith in the pew to hold us up. We can do that. But what about our spiritual faith? What about faith to move mountains? Faith to trust God to heal. Sometimes Brother Steve will say that we pray for God to do something, and then when we get the answer back that He did it, oh, what are you done? No, that's what I was saying. I listen to Brother Steve. Okay, I take your whole back, but our faith is important. Without faith, it is impossible to please Him. But he who comes to God must believe that He is. Even God. If you come to God for salvation, you have to believe that He is God. You have to believe that His Son came and died for our sins. And not only died, He was buried, He arose again. The third day is at the right hand of the Father to make intercessions for us. You must believe that if you ask Him to save you, He will. Admit you're a sinner, by faith. For he who comes to God must believe that He is, and that He is a rewarder of those who diligently seek Him. You won't reward Him in this life. Have faith in God. That's where our faith comes from. Without faith, it is impossible to please Him. Faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. Father, I thank You today for Your word. Thank You today, Father, that we can exercise our faith and our belief in You, Father. Father, now I am faith believing Your word will not return unto You void. Father, accomplish the things that You will have accomplished. Father, maybe I stuttered and stammered as I brought this message. Maybe I got off course. It's hard to follow. Father, with Your Holy Spirit, You will lead people to the knowledge of Your Son, Jesus Christ. That is our prayer today, Father, that they have not accepted You. Father, they will in everlasting life. Father, Your people just need to remember that You are bigger than all of our problems. You can handle each situation that comes our way. Father, we're trusting You to do that very thing with our nation today. In Jesus' name we pray. Will you stand, please? part of our service, we're going to talk about how to treat our enemies. We have more than one. We're going to talk about that. I'll come back and help me stumble through another lesson in God's Word. Word from anyone? Anything you need to announce? Anything that needs to be brought up before we are dismissed? Yes, ma'am.
I do have a praise report.
Whip it on us.
I'll read my nephew that
Uh-huh.
had an infection and he was afraid to go lose his little finger, but everything looks really good. So we told him God's prayers have been going up for him.
Amen. All right. We love to hear praise.
Yes.
Yes, ma'am.
Still need prayer for my sister Bonnie. I think August the 23rd is the Thursday in December. So keep her in prayer.
All right. Keep her sister in our prayer. All right. Somebody get the phone call to me. If that's God, tell him I want to talk to him. I'll talk to him later.
Means you're out of town.
That's right. All right, if I'm out of time, Brother Larry, will you dismiss us?
Father,